reveals that she believes that Arius' virus has actually infected people all across the United States, but is lying dormant until he activates it using an unknown trigger. Arius surveils the restaurant from afar and orders Maria to apprehend Rebecca. Later, when Rebecca uses the bathroom, she is surprised by Maria and captured. Inside the restaurant, Patricio, the man who Leon blames for the death of his unit, arrives and tells Leon that his wife and daughter have been taken hostage by the remaining members of Los Illuminados, who are working to help an arms dealer create a bioweapon to attack the US, and pleads that Leon help. Leon refuses, but soon after, Arius' men arrive, with Diego arming a Gatling gun and firing on the restaurant. Patricio hands his phone off to Leon before bleeding out. Chris then sees Maria making off with Rebecca, and the crew leave. Later, Rebecca wakes up, now wearing a wedding dress. Arius arrives and reveals that he is recreating his wedding day, which was interrupted by a drone strike by the US, which he was the sole survivor of. He has reanimated the remains of his family and friends, which he was forced to watch die at the hands of the United States, fueling his vengeance. He reveals that the virus he has created is called the animality, or A virus, and it consists of 3 strains: one to infect, one to activate, and one to vaccinate. He then notes Rebecca's resemblance to his late wife, hoping to have Rebecca take her place. She refuses, angering Arius and having her sent to his lab to infect her with the virus and replace her arm with his wife's, the only remains of her. Meanwhile, Leon and Chris inspect data from Patricio's phone and discover that Arius had used the Agua brand of drinking water to spread the virus in New York, and plans to trigger it soon. They also learn of the vaccine strain that can effectively turn off the virus in infected individuals. Arius then triggers the virus, sending Agua trucks across New York which expel a gas, infecting the city at large. Leon, Chris, and their army help split up and take out the trucks. They are able to destroy them all, and Maria is caught up in one of the blasts. Chris and Leon make their way to Arius' lab, and Chris is able to rescue Rebecca after a short fight with Diego. Chris takes Rebecca to the roof of the building, where he is attacked by Arius. After a short fight, Chris is able to throw Arius down a shaft of the building, where he nearly dies upon impact. However, Diego comes upon him and absorbs his body, mutating into a large creature containing both of their heads. The now mutated Arius makes his way to the roof once more, and Leon distracts him so Chris can search for the vaccine. Arius jumps to a nearby helicopter, and Leon drives a motorcycle towards him, jumping off as it flies into him, exploding on impact and weakening him. Chris then arrives and launches a grenade into Arius' heart, finally killing the creature. He then cures Rebecca, and the group release the vaccine above the city, curing the inhabitants and ending the outbreak. Later, Maria, having survived the previous explosion, finds Diego's dead body and looks on in a silent rage.
In June of 2017, a television crew travels to Dulvey, Louisiana to investigate a supposedly haunted house. Inside, the crew are attacked by the Baker family, with cameraman Clancy Jarvis taken captive and the other 2 killed. Clancy is then toyed with by the family. He almost escapes Marguerite's captivity by outsmarting her, but is knocked unconscious by Lucas, who begins to force him to play demented games, including a game of 21, where he's forced to indirectly cause the death of a fellow captive, Hoffman. Clancy's final game came as part of a birthday celebration, where he is lit on fire and burned to death.
Shortly after, Ethan Winters arrives in Dulvey, having tracked his wife Mia's movements there after receiving a panicked message from her, followed by her disappearance for over 3 years. He finds a house and underneath discovers Mia, still alive and seemingly well. However, this doesn't last long, and she suddenly turns violent and attacks him, forcing Ethan to kill his wife. Shortly after, he receives a call from Zoe Baker, who offers to help and tells him to escape through the attic. On his way, however, he is attacked again by a revived Mia, who cuts off his hand before walking off. In the attic, he is attacked by Mia once again, who he is able to defeat once more. He is unable to leave, however, as Jack Baker then attacks and captures Ethan. When he awakens, now with his hand reattached, he is welcomed into the family by the Bakers, now joined by a catatonic elderly woman. Ethan is able to escape from his restraints, but is chased around the house by Jack. A deputy arrives to investigate the house, but is killed by Jack shortly after, who Ethan is then forced to fight one-on-one. Ethan wins, with Jack surprisingly delivering the final gunshot to himself. Jack's death is short-lived, however, as Ethan is attacked by him very shortly after, witnessing his wounds healing and regenerating. Ethan slips away from Jack and fights his way through several creatures created from Evelyn's mold in the basement. Eventually, Ethan has a second showdown with Jack, obtaining a key he needs to escape the house. In the backyard, Ethan speaks to Zoe and learns that Mia is alive, but that they would need to create a serum to cure both women of their infection before they could leave. Ethan then heads off to find the ingredients for the serum, killing Marguerite in the process. He then learns that Lucas has captured the two women and is holding them hostage. Ethan is forced to play the same game that met Clancy with his death, but is able to outsmart Lucas and escape alive, forcing the baker's son to flee. Ethan then finds Mia and Zoe, who creates 2 doses of the serum with the ingredients Ethan provides. However, suddenly Jack appears once more, now heavily mutated. Ethan is forced to inject Jack with one of the doses of the serum, which, in his weakened state, allows his body to finally die. Outside, Ethan must decide which woman to cure with the remaining serum. Naturally, he chooses to cure his wife, Mia, but promises to send help for Zoe before the two leave her behind as they escape on a boat. They come across the tanker that Mia arrived on, and they are attacked by Evelyn. This knocks Ethan unconscious, and he has a vision of Jack proclaiming his family's innocence and asking Ethan to kill Evelyn to stop her infections. Mia then wakes up on the ship and begins to search for Ethan. She has visions of Evelyn, whom she doesn't remember, but claims is her daughter. Evelyn makes Mia watch a tape which details her final moments on the ship to restore her memory. She then finds Ethan and hands him a vial of Evelyn's DNA. She then resists Evelyn's control and allows Ethan to escape the ship. He then finds a nearby secret lab and learns the truth about Evelyn's origins as a BOW, created to take control of her victims. Lucas, however, was immunized against Evelyn in exchange for his job of collecting data for her creators, the Connections. Using Evelyn's DNA, Ethan creates a toxin that will kill her, and he makes his way back to the Baker house. There, she tries to take control of him, but he is able to resist and inject her with the toxin. Afterwards, her true current form is revealed as the old woman in the wheelchair, as her aging had been accelerated as a side effect of not being monitored by her creators. She then mutates into a giant creature, knocking Ethan outside. There, he receives a message from an unknown caller who drops a special weapon from a helicopter called the Albert 01. Ethan then uses it to shoot Evelyn and finally destroy her. Afterwards, the Blue Umbrella Corps Alpha team arrives to rescue Ethan and Mia, and their leader takes off his mask to reveal himself to be none other than Chris Redfield. The couple are then reunited and evacuated in a Blue Umbrella chopper, finally taking them away from the horrors of Dulvey.
Chris then heads into the secret lab Ethan found to search for Lucas Baker, and hopefully gain more intel on the Connections. Despite several traps left by Lucas, Chris is able to work his way through the lab and eventually find another one operated by the Connections. Lucas reveals that he had betrayed the organization and killed all of the Connections researchers there. Chris is able to corner Lucas, shooting him and triggering a mutation within him. Chris is able to kill his mutated form, then destroy a nearby server, stopping the transmission of Evelyn's data to an unknown third party. Afterwards, Chris is called back to the camp to take an urgent call.
Sometime later, a pair of Blue Umbrella soldiers find Zoe, partially infected by Evelyn. Her uncle, Joe Baker, arrives and takes down the soldiers, believing them to be responsible for her current condition. One of them tells Joe about a cure in a nearby shack, and he goes and finds it. When he returns, he administers the cure to Zoe, but it doesn't fully work. The Umbrella soldier explains that she needs more, and Joe can find it at their base. However, before he can reveal its location, the soldier is killed by a molded. Joe takes Zoe to find the base, encountering a powerful, immortal molded he calls the Swamp Man. Joe finds the base, but discovers the cure to have been moved to a nearby boat. On board, Joe encounters the Swamp Man, but is able to find a full dose of the cure. However, before he can administer it to Zoe, she is captured and taken by the Swamp Man to a nearby church. There, Joe faces the Swamp Man, who he discovers to be the final mutation of his own brother, Jack Baker. Jack knocks Joe unconscious, then puts him in a coffin and dumps him into the swamp. Joe survives, washing up on shore near the Baker household. He fights his way through molded and finds a prototype gauntlet created by Umbrella. Joe makes his way inside and finds Zoe, guarded by Jack. The two fight one final time, and Joe uses his gauntlet to finally kill his brother once and for all. Joe then gives Zoe the full cure, and she wakes up. Just then, Blue Umbrella forces arrive, and Chris reveals that he was sent to help. Afterwards, Zoe is fully cured of her infection, and she receives a call from Ethan, who she thanks for keeping his promise to send help.
At an unspecified point in the future, an Alaskan research team discovers a whale preserved in ice. Inside of it, creatures come to life that proceed to infect a member of the team. One researcher sends a sample to a Dr. Dan Gibson in the US. Gibson studies it to create a vaccine, but his team becomes infected during the trials. A special force team is sent by the Center for Disease Control to retrieve his work. Agent Lisa Martin is able to help Gibson escape, but is shot in the process, developing amnesia. Sometime later, Lisa and Gibson are living in Croatia, where the disease is spread with a group of other survivors. Supplies are running low in the city, and escape looks unlikely with the amount of infected surrounding the border. Lisa and Gibson hear a rumor of a girl on the island of Lenosa who is immune to the virus and may be the key to a cure. The team hatch a plan to distract the zombies with music in order to slip past them to reach an air base to fly to the island. Gibson is separated from the rest of the group, but Lisa eventually finds the air base mostly abandoned. They find evidence that Gibson was there, and they ask the soldiers stationed there if they had seen Gibson. They are informed by Dr. Joe Nags that Gibson is believed to be a bioterrorist and is on his way to the US to stand trial for his hand in the virus's spread. He also states that the virus has been sent for further research to the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, or USAMRIID. However, their discussion is cut off when Gibson calls from the aircraft he was being transferred in, claiming that he hijacked the craft. Colonel Maurice Green sends Nags and the others in the USS Wyoming submarine to head to Lenosa Island to find Gibson. On the way, Lisa learns that the submarine has received orders for Operation Walking Dead, which Nags explains is a plan by NATO to destroy India and China so the zombies cannot affect the heavily populated countries and exponentially increase their numbers. The Wyoming is revealed to be carrying over 100 nuclear missiles to carry out this task. Knowing that Gibson's cure is the only way to prevent this, the group hopes to prevent the widespread execution. Gibson parachutes onto the island but does not find the girl. Another soldier from the airbase, Scott, finds Gibson, who reveals that he is infected. Gibson then tells Scott that Lisa was initially sent to him by the US government to seduce him and steal the sample of the virus, but her amnesia prevented her from carrying out her plan. Meanwhile, the USS Wyoming is attacked by a group of mutated whales. They surmise that the whale's blood contains antibodies to defeat the virus, and Lisa heads off to find Gibson. She finds him infected and injects him with the whale blood. He awakens, but due to his own experiments mixing with the blood, he also lost all of his memories of Lisa and his work for the government. Lisa is then ejected by helicopter to continue her work with the USAMRIID.
And with that, we conclude our journey through the world of Resident Evil. While we get to return to Raccoon City once again this year, the future of the virus and Umbrella's legacy is yet to be written. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you made it this far, make sure you like the video and comment on what you'd like to see us cover next. Special thanks to Bob Ross for suggesting this one. More importantly, make sure you click the link on screen and check out the 2-Bit Players, where you can join their unfiltered journey through various games in the Resident Evil series. And you better subscribe to them as well. Also, please consider supporting Suggestive Gaming on Patreon. This video alone took over 5 months of constant work to put together, so your support would go a long way in getting future ones out faster. Thanks again, guys. Love you all. Mwah.
BioShock is a fantastic series, and it's due to how much these games affected me that I wanted to talk about them all with you. This video is actually 3 separate parts turned into a much larger project, with each video being made with the sole intention of not only retelling the story of these games, but to also allow me to give my thoughts on their stories along the way. If you're new here, then this is the perfect place to watch all 3 videos, but even if you've seen them already, there is an added section at the end where we discuss the 2 novels released during the game's lifecycle. With all of that out of the way though, welcome to the BioShock series story retrospective. Let's get started. BioShock 1 has one of the most genius stories I have ever seen. Its central plot is brilliant, and the attention to detail when it came to its setting and world building is arguably a masterpiece just on its own. Today I want to look back on BioShock's story and uncover what really made this one of the best games of all time despite it being 14 years old. As always, spoiler warning ahead for the whole story of BioShock, and with that, let's get started. As always, we need to start at the prologue, but for BioShock we need to go back even further. That title, BioShock. It's such a bizarre word when you think about it. Many games have a very distinct title with weird meanings, but at least I can tell you what the words mean. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game with a cyberpunk art style that's set in the year 2077. A game like Dragon Age is a bit tricky as I've never played Dragon Age before, so while its title as a whole makes no sense to me, I can at least understand what the individual words mean, Dragon, Age, and Origins, and maybe draw some conclusions about the game. But what is a Bioshock? I, like many, might think it's a homage to System Shock 2, which was Irrational Games' first project, but furthermore, it could also be a shortened version of biological shock, which in the context of the game makes sense given how Adam ruined this society and how our protagonist acts throughout the game. But we haven't gotten there yet, so I'll return to this in a moment. As we start the game, the player needs certain questions answered in order to feel invested in the story. Who are we? How did we get here? And does the story make sense? Bioshock creates a sort of meta-narrative based around these answers, but once again, more on that at the end of the video. Our first interaction with the game is a cutscene, and Bioshock wastes no time getting right into the action, as the plane we're traveling on crashes in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We awake amongst the wreckage and need to find land. The only place within eyesight is a giant lighthouse next to us. I've always seen this lighthouse as a beacon of light in a dark time, although it's a bit more literal in this case, as the only light we can see is the moon, the burning plane, and this lighthouse. As we enter, the door shuts behind us, and we see a giant statue of a man with the phrase, "No gods or kings, only man," written on a banner. While it's confusing as is, this confusion should actually start earlier. Why is there a lighthouse in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? Even if we were to ignore that, why isn't there people in the lighthouse? There's so much wrong with all of this, and while that does sound like a criticism, I actually find it to be a wonderful decision, as it's making the player question everything they see. It's also the start of many mysteries this game will tease to the player, which causes them to become more invested in the world around them in an attempt to find out more. As we head down the stairs, we see 3 plaques with the words Art, Industry, and Science written on them, while a violin cover of Bobby Darin's Beyond the Sea accompanies us in the bathysphere. What's important to remember is why we're going in this submarine. We're in the middle of the ocean, and it's the 60s. Even if others had survived that plane crash, who are we going to call for help? Our only option is this bathysphere, as it's either this or swimming at night in the Atlantic Ocean, and I'll take my chances. We presumably descend deeper into the lighthouse while a message plays from Andrew Ryan, someone who looks oddly similar to the statue upstairs. Bioshock has many memorable moments, and this will be one of 3 key moments throughout the entire game.
I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture.
Rapture might be my favorite setting in any video game ever made. Not just the idea, but the reasoning behind it is brilliant. The fact that a city not only exists at the bottom of the sea, but also functions at the bottom of the sea is something that has never been done before. Andrew Ryan also says that Rapture was made for those who do not fear censors or morality. It's a judgment-free place, but not in the sense of people getting along and being happy together, but a place that allowed those who wanted more to get more. Andrew Ryan says that the surface was constrained by laws and ethics, but Rapture was no such place, and it's because of this ideology that allowed Rapture to blossom into what we see now, a bustling city under the sea, completely shut away from society. At least that's what it seems like, until we actually enter Rapture. Our first encounter with the city is a very grim one, as we're going to be introduced to a man named Johnny until we get to see him sliced open right in front of us. We then meet with Johnny's killer, who screams at us before attempting to open the bathysphere. It's possible that her anger is the same as the people who used to be here, as there are signs everywhere saying things like, "Ryan doesn't own us, let us leave, and Rapture is dead." Earlier I talked about a light that shines in the darkness when I brought up the lighthouse. Atlas is like the lighthouse, but in a more metaphorical sense, as Atlas saves us from this person who is trying to kill us. His charming demeanor and attitude makes him instantly likable, and that is further reinforced by his own actions, as once again he's trying to save us. We push further and are able to arm ourselves with a wrench. We can take a couple practice swings to test out our new weapon, but we can also get a look at these splicers Atlas was talking about, as they aren't alien creatures, but they don't look human anymore. Everything seems to be going smoothly so far given the circumstances, until we see the Gatherer's Garden vending machine. can't explain to you how genuinely terrifying this was when I first played the game. Currently, we don't understand what a big daddy or little sister is just yet, so seeing a tiny child with a syringe as big as she is walking with a moving scuba suit is probably the most terrifying thing you'll ever see. We also discover that we can now cast electricity through our hands, which is just another bizarre and crazy thing that Rapture has. We also get a look at a concept that is shown throughout Rapture, and it's how the world continues to reinforce that you're underwater. It's not enough just to have a few windows that show the sea, but the effects that the outside environment can have on Rapture, such as the plane wing crashing into the tunnel causing all the water to flood inside. There are even smaller instances of this, such as the water falling from the ceiling or just puddles of water in places where it shouldn't be. BioShock also shows other problems that Rapture can have, like a lack of electricity or when this elevator falls, and instead of just being a cool scene to ramp up the destruction, we can actually see someone walk out of it while on fire. It makes Rapture seem real, as it showcases how a place like this can have problems, but also what problems a place like this may face, like water damage and poor infrastructure. If you want to go even further than this is also the first showcase of how the splicers interact inside the game, as this female splicer is trying to sing a lullaby to her baby, despite it being quite the frightening tale. She's talking about how her baby's going to be sold by the pound once her dad is gone, and how she'll be alone when her parents are both dead. Except it seems like she's losing her mind as she's struggling to figure out why her baby doesn't feel the same anymore, until we realize her baby's actually a pistol. Atlas was also listening in on this lullaby, as he says that it was the plasmids that caused all the chaos. There's even an audio log not even a couple minutes later that captures one of the moments of Rapture's downfall.
Here's a toast to Diane McClintock, silliest girl in Rapture. Silly enough to fall in love with Andrew Ryan. Silly. What happened? I'm bleeding. Oh God. What's happening?
It seems that an explosion went off during the New Year's Eve party, presumably right where we're standing, which killed numerous people. We don't know why, but if we're to believe Atlas, plasmids caused it in some way. Later we get to see the little sister and Big Daddy again, and are able to observe them without the fear of being stabbed, and it's quite the brutal scene. It shows the dynamic relationship between the two, and also the importance of the little sister and the strength of the Big Daddies. We learn that the little sisters gather Adam, while the Big Daddies protect them from people who want to harm them. It's also assumed that people might want to harm the little sister because of the Adam that she carries. After some fighting, we make it to the end of the intro, where Andrew Ryan appears and notices that we've invaded his city. He asks if we're a part of the CIA or KGB, as he probably assumes that the only people capable of finding and infiltrating his great city would be the government, and he also thinks that the government either wants to put an end to his city or nationalize it, two things he'll never let happen. Despite being just a voice for a majority of the game, it's his personality and the power in his voice that makes him feel like a threat, and I've always liked how impressive the voice acting was for him. Of course, we have to escape his ambush and arrive at the medical pavilion, ending the tutorial. BioShock's intro is pretty much perfect. We get a cohesive set of circumstances that show how our character made it to Rapture, and then get introduced to what Rapture looks like, how its inhabitants interact with the city, and a few pieces of information for the player to think about, like plasmids, Adam, Big Daddies, Little Sisters, and the downfall of Rapture. There is even a ton of things we still don't know yet, like who we are, who Atlas is, and how the plane crashed. And while I do wish more backstory was given on this, once you beat the game you realize it's impossible to talk about right now. There was so much mystery with BioShock, from its setting to its characters to even the actual plot, that it makes you want to learn more. And while this information and mystery can be considered overwhelming when shown all at once, these mechanics, characters, and locations are everywhere, so it's hard not to remember them, and it also gives the player something to go off of instead of being left in the dark all game. It's also been like 15 minutes since we started the game, so it's not like it's been 4 hours of game time without any answers. We're just getting started, so having a bit of mystery is perfectly fine this early in the game, and the way this is pulled off in BioShock is expertly done. From here, things start to become harder to talk about, as BioShock's main world-building device is the audio logs we find scattered around the map. There is a common critique amongst gamers that it's unimmersive when there are audio logs or recordings scattered throughout the world, as it makes no sense that this many people would be using them when talking about the most mundane of topics. And while I definitely agree with this sentiment, I've always just chalked it up to a limitation of game design, especially in the case of BioShock, where there are no NPCs the player can talk to learn about Rapture, so all their information has to be from the audio logs. Thankfully, there is a ton of them in this game and are extremely easy to find, as they glow and are more often than not found in areas you'll be traveling through anyway. These provide lots of context to Rapture's downfall and explain a lot of what's called definition as a feeling of intense pleasure or joy, but it's also a theological belief within Christianity. Assuming my research is correct, it's an event that would be the end of times, where those who are faithful Christians, whether